We're here today on Behind the Headlines to talk about bicycle boulevards in Palo Alto. And joining us is Senior Transportation Planner Chris Corrao. Thank you for being here from the city.
Thank you for having me.
This week, Sue, you wrote about the Ross Road Bicycle Boulevard. Lots is going on there, lots of fixtures being installed, lots of discussion amongst the residents about what's happening. So it seems to me that there are a lot of things that people didn't expect to happen, which I'm sure is very common when you're planning city improvements. Tell us just a little bit about what you've been hearing.
Okay, well, I think there's been a tremendous amount of discussion, certainly on the next door for the Palo Verde neighborhood. I think there were more than 200 people who commented, and they ranged from, what's going on here? I have no idea, to, this is a great idea. This is just what we need. Mm-hmm. Why didn't you come to the previous meetings? Yeah. That type of thing. So I think the main thing is that in some places the street is being narrowed, and people see concrete things like concrete islands or bulbouts, sort of areas that are from the curb that kind of come out and narrow the road a bit, and they don't really understand what it's all about, and they're not yet envisioning what will happen in terms of bicycle and vehicles being together in the same space, because right now it looks like the vehicles are going into the bike lanes.
Wait, so you think that most of the criticism is because people aren't understanding it, or are there people who legitimately don't like the new design?
Well, I think they're confused because not everything has come into place just yet, so they can't really quite envision what's going to happen.
So let's ask Chris to give us kind of the overview of what is happening there, and why is it happening, and what's the goal?
This is a pretty typical response when we're in construction, because it's really hard to envision how the road's going to work when you have construction crews out there digging holes and building the curb extensions. And what's really makes it hard to envision is that each aspect of the design plays into how the road will work, including the landscaping and, more importantly, the roadway markings that make it more clear where you should be driving, where you should be cycling. The curbs also, for those curb extensions, get painted red so that people know not to park there. And so it's really hard to wrap your head around it. So I can certainly understand why people might be thrown off or put off during construction. But when all these elements come into place, I think what people will find is that it works. Once you get used to the changes, it works really well at slowing down traffic, which is really the main goal. And there's some confusion, I think, about how, I hear the term like bike lanes used a lot, but this is a shared street similar to Bryant. So the goal for a bike boulevard really is to slow traffic and have so that bikes and vehicles can be in the same space.
And part of the idea of making bike boulevards is that you're trying to increase ridership, bicycling within the city, and then also making it easier for people to commute. Is that right?
Yeah.
I heard some goals that the city set for 2020. It's like
to double the bicycle mode share. We're at 8.5%. That's 8.5% of the population uses a bike to get to work.
Okay.
So we want to double that rate by 2020.
15%, 17%.
But I do want to also drive home that are really focus on that this isn't just a bicycle project. A lot of the features in this, particularly the curb extensions, raised crosswalks, and others, are really more about pedestrian safety and safety of school children getting to school. And also, really, there's many features that benefit motorists in terms of your sight lines when you're turning right, let's say, and many of the streets where have these kind of sweeping, wider radius turns, which pushes vehicles back when you're trying to make a right turn. So a curb extension allows you to be closer and make eye contact with drivers. And then the main thing really is that the overall project is adding beautification and traffic calming, which is something that we've heard for years. That
People just going too fast.
Yeah, people. That's
Dangerous.
a big problem that we've heard over the years is that people want traffic calming because traffic's getting worse and people are using streets as cut-throughs.
I was going to ask you one thing about the traffic calming.
Yeah.
The city had in its the 607-page report that came out in May.
Yeah.
There was discussion about the actual traffic survey that you did, and it looked like all of the streets within the Ross Road area that you're working on, these were, including Bryant, were within the 85th percentile. Were about roughly, let's say, about 28 miles per hour or so. Something like that, which was considered to be, you want to have for good, successful bike boulevard at or under 30 miles per hour. Is that correct? And so I wondered if there was really, how much more traffic calming was really needed on the street, or is it a perception that that it's actually that people are going too fast, or is it a reality?
I think it's a reality. People are driving pretty quickly on Ross Road. And Ross is a fairly narrow street. It's about 36 feet wide. So when we looked at the options to have a bike facility on Ross Road, you have a few options. One of the options would be a bike lane, and I've heard some people mention, why don't you just build the bike lane? But a bike lane would require removing parking from one side of the street entirely due to the roadway width. And then that would only, on the other side of the street, you'd have a bike lane where people would have to put their trash bins in another bike lane. So it's really not a great setup. It doesn't also calm traffic at all. Really that's when we started looking at a bike boulevard. Basically it's accomplishing multiple goals. It's accomplishing neighborhood beautification, traffic calming, and also making it easier for people to bike. So it's not really just a bike project.
I think, I was just going to say, the city's had quite a few bike projects, and I think this one is unique just because of its scope and ambition.
Of course.
It comprises roughly half of the city's $20 million bike and pedestrian plan. So that's like $10 million right there just in this area. So when you have like 11 new traffic circles pop up, it's kind of easy to imagine why some people would be caught off guard and have a mixed reaction. But I think the one concern that I heard, I think I'm pretty sure you heard, is the outreach that was done, the idea of waking up and being surprised by these things. I was hoping you could kind of address that and kind of like let us know what the city did to kind of warn residents that this is coming. And if there's any kind of lessons learned about what could be done better next time around.
Absolutely. So I think while we did do a pretty robust public outreach process, we always do. We have community meetings and we send notices to residents. Unfortunately, it's pretty common that there's always some people you can't reach, and we made our best effort to reach everyone during the planning phase, all the way up until construction. But clearly, some people didn't hear about the project and they're upset. And so we're really, I've been speaking with people directly, going out into the field. We have a community relations manager, also Sarah, who's able to go and meet with people and talk about individual particular features that are right in front of someone's home. We're certainly, now that we've seen the message that some people feel that they didn't know about the project, we're trying to be much more proactive as we move along the corridor and literally knock on doors and say, hey, just a reminder, we're building a curb extension right there. Because, that's, I think, what people need. I think part of there's definitely a lesson learned for us in that, I think in the future we'll be a little bit more direct. But I think part of the problem also, because we did have, I think Palo Alto Online covered this project many times during the public process. We were getting out there on Nextdoor and Facebook and via mailers, and we'd go where there's community events on the weekends and held community workshops. I think part of the challenge is that we have so many very high-profile projects that are close to construction right now, like the bike bridge, this Charleston Arrastradero, upgrade downtown. We have many big projects that people probably receive a lot from the city, and they probably recycle cards, or say if they're not particularly interested in something, maybe not go. So I think that could be part of the problem. So
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, it kind of struck me that I think the level of understanding amongst residents and the level of project, there was a kind of disconnect there. Allison Cormack was interviewed by Sue, and it kind of struck me that she thought when you said bike project, or when she heard bike project, she thought bike lanes. You know, everyone's like, oh, I know what a bike lane is. But this to me is like at a whole new level. And I was kind of wondering, are there fixtures that are being installed that pretty much have never been installed in Palo Alto? Is this kind of a configuration of fixtures that people haven't seen before, and people might not be familiar with?
Well, there's really only one feature that's never been done in Palo Alto, and that's called a raised intersection. So we have a few in the project. Basically, it's when you have an intersection and you raise the entire area up to the sidewalk level. So it's all one shared space. And before, as you approach the intersection, about 7 feet back, it ramps up. So it's similar to a raised crosswalk, which we do have in Palo Alto. And it requires people to navigate that space much slower.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's a combination. I think the combination of so many things is what makes it such a large project.
I also think it's the inherent complexity of sometimes trying to figure out exactly like what these plans are showing. I mean, if someone tells you there's a 4-story building is going to go across the street, you kind of have some idea. But if someone tells you there's like 11 bike projects happening, one in your area, you could imagine all sorts of things. So I guess my question for Chris is there any kind of effort to kind of have, I know Allison kind of called for that, more digestible like illustrations or renderings so that people have a more clear idea of understanding of things that may seem obvious to traffic engineers but not.
Sure, yeah.
Is there a glossary? Like, what is a chicane anyway?
What is a chicane?
We tried to start, so the place that we kind of started with that is we did an FAQ that we recently released and published on our website, which is cityofpaloalto.org/bikeped-safety. That's a new project URL.
Okay.
And there's an FAQ there that kind of goes through some of the frequent questions we're hearing from people and talking about the features a little bit with some renderings also. And we're also working on sort of a street user guide that will be more graphic, so people can just see an image of a raised crosswalk and with a brief description, not very text heavy. And I think that would be helpful for people. I do think, though, that when everything is complete, it will be self-explanatory. It really won't require any sort of special training. The only thing that may be tricky for people to wrap their head around is traffic circles or roundabouts. Yields.
Are those the same things, roundabouts and traffic circles?
They're not. Roundabouts are yields, so there's no stop sign.
Okay.
And traffic circles are more decorative, and they have stop signs usually.
Okay.
That was one of the issues that people were raising, was why in some spots that, their beloved stop signs were being taken out.
Yes.
So could you
beloved stop signs?
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, direction.
Bicyclists hate stop signs.
Yeah, bicyclists don't like the stop signs, but the drivers and I guess pedestrians do. So I just kind of want to get a little sense of what the thinking is in taking some things out, and maybe you've put a traffic circle in there instead.
Yeah. So sometimes we generally with bike boulevards, we try to, it's called flipping stops, where you move stop signs to the opposing street so that if you're on a bicycle, you don't have to start and stop as much, which can be hard for people with carrying kids or on cargo bikes, bikes that are heavier. We did have a resident that was concerned, a group of residents, about the Ross and Ames intersection.
Right,
And we've actually decided to leave those stops because of its proximity to a school and that it's on a school route. So we do, we make changes kind of when we need to in construction.
Right. And the other thing, too, is I think one of the things that I kept hearing about is where the road narrows and you've got the cars going in either direction and then the bicycle as well. And so
The slotted
speed hump,
The famous slotted speed hump.
So one of the kind of, and then it's, one of the bicyclists I talked to was talking about, it's not so bad. I mean, people kind of freak out when they think of the idea that kids are going to be in the middle of the road biking and not off to the side. And won't that be more dangerous? And in fact, this person said, no, it's not going to be that way. It's going to be, actually, it's better because when I'm on my bike, people don't see I'm on the right-hand side, and you're in the blind spot and so on and so forth.
That's true.
So maybe you could speak a little bit to, these fears that people are having about both riding down the center of the street and going through a narrower corridor.
Sure. I have heard a lot of questions about the slotted speed humps. I think partly because when they're being built, we have cones and barricades, which makes them really narrow. When they're constructed, they're 20 feet wide from planter box to planter box, which is enough for 2 vehicles to pass through at the same time. There's also a yellow center line that gets added once we're done installing the speed hump. No speed humps are in there yet. So it's way too early to really judge this feature, right? And there's no trees there either, which also kind of reduce your vision, so you have to slow down. But generally, the width of these medians is the same as the width of a parked vehicle. So cyclists, if there's parked vehicles, would be in the same position as they are now. So that's something that's worth noting. And really, I think the concern mostly is just that it narrows down, but that helps. Having both it's called horizontal deflection, which is anything that requires you to move around, like a speed hump or a curb extension. A curb extension or a bulbout, combined with the speed hump, which is called vertical deflection. So the combination of those two things is proven to be the most effective in traffic calming. Yeah. So that's why this project has a combination of so many different features, like roundabouts and speed humps and curb extensions.
I kind of wanted to ask you about the just basic modeling for what's the evidence for what you're talking about? Where have these studies been done? Or are you taking these from other cities? And how do you know where there should be a roundabout and where there should be a speed hump?
Sure. So that kind of the design really goes into the community outreach process. These particular features on Ross Road with the planter boxes and speed humps really came out of the desire for more of a tree canopy on Ross Road. That was something we heard from residents pretty consistently. In terms of the evidence, the FHWA, it's the Federal Highway Administration, they have an e-primer on their website that has a lot of the research shown, and it shows before and after studies when bike boulevard projects are implemented. And what it shows is not only reduced vehicle speeds, but also almost more importantly, is increased compliance with yielding. Not to sound jargony, what that means is, if you come up to a raised crosswalk and you're in your car, you're much more likely to yield for a pedestrian than if it's just your typical crosswalk, because they're out of your field of vision. So we've posted that on our website, so people can see that. Also, NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, they're sort of a leading organization in our country, and they have a lot of research on their website, and we link to that site on our site so residents can see. There is a lot of research that's gone into this project.
Yeah, I can imagine. You're not just like doing SimCity, putting them down.
But the location of specific things is often more connected to like the public outreach process.
Yeah. And I think it's also worth pointing out that the city had spent several years putting together a bike and pedestrian master plan, which includes some of the kind of elements that are being used on these boulevards. And it's also probably worth pointing out that that master plan is probably one of the few that the city's done in the last decade that's actually been a huge success in terms of things in it being implemented. It's got funding, it's got actual projects. It's kind of like a big success story if you're a bicyclist who wants to see these things get done. And so I was hoping to zoom out and just ask Chris about some of the other things in that plan, besides this particular project, that residents can expect to see in the months ahead, so they won't be surprised.
Sure.
Is this kind of like the main focus now, or are there other things happening?
Well, there's definitely other projects happening, but for me, this is the main focus. We have a second phase of this plan that we're planning construction on as soon as this plan finishes. So really in the fall of 2018. And that extends this project on Maybell Park, Wilkie, Stanford, all the way down towards Mountain View in that direction. And we're still in final design on that, so we don't have the construction documents yet. But we'll be doing more outreach to those neighborhoods before we break ground. And we'll probably approach Palo Alto Weekly also, just to make sure everyone's very aware of
what's going on.
what's about to happen. But we do have with the Charleston Arrestadero project, which Public Works is managing. That's a pipeline project. There's the protected intersection at Embarcadero and El Camino Real. That's a Dutch-style protected intersection that the city has in design. The bike bridge course, over US 101.
Which may get built someday.
I hope so.
2020, if things go as planned.
And then we have a project on Churchill Avenue between the Caltrain tracks and El Camino Real. And that really connects the shared use path that stops at the Pali driveway entrance.
Right.
So it would take it all the way up the frontage to El Camino and then have a protected crossing to Stanford's campus.
Yeah.
One of the things that you and I were talking about in the kitchen as well before we started was just the idea of, there's all of this different street furniture, whatever you want to call it, these different things that are going in that people have never really seen before. We're talking about like Middlefield Road, where you've got these sort of posts to keep people, to keep cars out and that type of thing. And I think you and I had briefly talked about during our interview a sort of almost like a handbook on how to use these things, so that you're going to actually do some outreach to schools. Can you just describe a little bit about what you have planned there?
Sure. So we have a Safe Routes to School staff team, and we're working with them to really make sure that the schools are getting the information they need about these new project elements. And so we'll be working directly with them to make sure that the students are being trained on how to use a roundabout and really what to expect. And then you brought up a good point. I mean, we are using more, I think we're using more concrete than used to be used in this profession. Right. So people are accustomed to seeing painted bike lanes, and now they're seeing concrete barriers, and they're seeing bollards, and that may startle people, but the reason is because they're far safer, and there's research to back that up. And we're trying to create the safest bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities for Palo Alto that we can, based on the research.
Do a lot of these designs come from Europe? Have they come out of there, or where do they kind of originate?
So some have. The concept of a protected intersection came out of Europe. The idea of a shared street really is a European concept that Palo Alto kind of turned into the bike boulevard. That was a Palo Alto invention that's since spread across the country.
And the Dutch influence is felt in El Camino and Stanford. Or what intersection is doing the Dutch intersection?
Oh, Embarcadero.
Embarcadero.
That's a Dutch design. So yeah, a lot of these things do, but some have come from the U.S. also. Because we certainly have different issues in the United States versus Europe. And
do you ever get frustrated when residents suggest what you should have done? Like, well, there should be just a little concrete barrier between the bike path and the road, and that would have been great.
Yeah, I don't really get. I try not to get frustrated, because I understand that if someone knows nothing about a project or hasn't really heard about it, and they're just giving you their 2 cents, right? So it's I try to just be conversational and listen to what people have to say, because
it's part of the job.
It's part of the job, and I enjoy talking with people and hearing their feedback, and even if they're upset, I am a firm believer that when this project is done, and people have had time to adjust, in the end they'll be very happy with it.
So I'm curious, taking this project, Ross Road, forward, we're in December now. What are we going to see over the next couple of months? When is it going to be
complete?
Yeah.
Sure. So I would say you could expect, we have the project broken into different segments, construction segments. You have a map here, that shows. So we've been in segments 1 and 2 since the beginning. I would say after the new year, we should be out of segment 1 and in segment 2 and 3. And then shortly after into segment 4 through about March.
So segment 4, just for people who can't see the map, that's Amarillo Avenue, and the other 2 that you're talking about, what are segments 2 and 3?
So this is Ross starting at Lewis going north.
Right.
Sure, yeah.
Up to Loma Verde is number 2, and then from Loma Verde to Moreno is 3.
So it's really the whole Ross corridor is really Carina Way to Oregon Expressway, just a little bit past Oregon Expressway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we intend on wrapping up construction in September of 2018.
Okay.
The whole project.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Chris, I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Headlines.
Thanks for having me.
It's been
really
very
appreciate
informative, and all questions can go to you. the public. What's the URL again?
Sure, it's cityofpaloalto.org/bikeped-safety. And we also have a dedicated community relations manager on the project that can, if people have questions, they can contact. Her name's Sarah, and her contact information is on the webpage. And she can go out and meet with people as needed if they have questions about something right by their house. So
Terrific.
we appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat with you guys.
Okay, well, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
That's it for Behind the Headlines this week. If you want to subscribe or like us, you can click below. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so you can check us out there. And always catch up on the news on paloaltoonline.com. We'll see you next week.